It is Sunday, June 9th, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. Christ is risen. We're just about to leave the Paschal time, so we have to say it as many times as we can in the next couple of days. I am Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. You know, we get together here on Sunday nights to meet a new Everyday Orthodox Christian, and I just feel like our project really is to build community through conversation. You know, we're all divided up in North America. We've got all these different jurisdictions. We worship in different languages. You know, you could be living right down the street from someone, and if you're in the Greek church and they're in the Antiochian church, you might not even meet. You might not even know that the other one is Orthodox if you do meet. So I think it's really important and wonderful for all of us to get to know one another. So I kind of think of this as like a national coffee hour. And, you know, let's just sit down with someone new and ask them where they're from and what they're up to and find out. But at any rate, we are here tonight. We've got Matushka Trudy Richter producing the program as always, and she's answering your calls. So if you want to call in, you can do so at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And she'll answer the phone. She'll talk to you for a little while. She'll patch you right through to our guest, and you can ask any questions that you might have. But tonight's guest is Mr. Evan Mann, and I am super excited to have him on the show, actually. Father Evan Armitage, different Evan, actually introduced me to Evan Mann a couple months back and was like, you got to talk to him. And I wasn't sure why, and Evan wasn't sure why, and we're on this phone call, and we're like, why are we supposed to meet each other again? We're not sure. And I think it's because Evan is putting together the world's most beautiful documentary. It's so cool. It's an Orthodox documentary. It's a long, slow process because you have to get funding and you have to get all these people on board and get lots of help. But he's working on it, and his work is really beautiful. It's called Facing Phantoms. And during this program, we'll tell you how you can get a peek at some of the sort of shorter little films that he's done to build up to it and to develop some interest in it and to show you what he's got in mind. And I'll tell you, you're going to be blown away. You're going to love it. But so it's direct from St. Spiridon's in Loveland, Colorado. Tonight we have for you Evan Mann. Evan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Elisa.
Well, I'm so excited to have you. I know we got to speak for a little while, and it was really fun. It was nice talking to you. I'm glad to talk to you again, and I'm glad to be able to tell our audience a little bit about your project because it's really neat. But before we get to that, I want to start back at the beginning and really get to know you. So, where did you grow up? Where does your story start?
In the beginning, I was born in Colorado Springs, and then, my parents split up when I was 5, and then my mom moved to Durango, and then my dad moved to the East Coast shortly thereafter. And then I knew I always wanted I went to middle school and high school out there in Pennsylvania. And I always wanted to come back to Colorado, though. And so when I graduated, I came to Northern Colorado, went to Colorado State University, and that's where I met my wife, Deborah. And
Nice.
I studied art. And,
nice. Well, don't skip ahead too fast. Hold on. I want to hear that. I was like, okay, so you were in Colorado before middle school, and then at middle school you switch, which I think is kind of a common thing actually for boys, that it's good for boys to be with their father, although you never know. But how was it? How was that shift for you from Colorado to Pennsylvania? I feel like I'm certainly like, it looks different. Are the people different? Was it a different kind of culture completely, or what do you think? I guess it depends on where in Pennsylvania you are, too.
Yeah, I was an hour north of Philadelphia in the Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton area in a little town called Coopersburg.
Oh, nice.
And ironically, after becoming Orthodox, my wife and I found this little church in Emmaus that we would visit, and we know who Father Andrew Stevadamic was the priest there. And this is long before he was, I think published Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy. But yeah, the people, I moved a lot as a kid. And so it was just sort of another move. And I made really good friends there. And I really put roots in and had an wild and amazing childhood. So,
how was it wild and amazing? What were you doing?
We were good kids, but we did a lot of maybe things that weren't advisable. Like we were into like motocross and BMX, and we would like tow each other in the winter. We'd tow each other on 4-wheelers, on snowboards through like the streets, and we would light ourselves on fire and jump off jumps. And we would film all of this.
Wow.
And
Wow, you are
and
Evel Knievel. Like, that's amazing.
and I ended up being like, I think that's when I started making films. Is I made this film in high school that was like our whole life, like the last 4 years of our life, and we made skits, and we made these videos where we would all walk backwards and do these things backwards, and then I would play them all in reverse. And so like we jump off of roofs backwards, and then you'd like play it in reverse, and you're like walking up to a house, and then you like jump up to the top, and it was just fun. It was super fun. We did so many things.
That is beautiful. Were you feeling like by high school you were kind of feeling like I would like to be a filmmaker, or were you thinking for a real job, I'll be a chemist, but also I kind of like film?
That's a great question. Everyone said you couldn't make it as an artist, and so I think that was kind of in the back of my head, but I knew I wanted to study art, and I don't think film was quite a thing. It was more, I ended up going to college, and I discovered printmaking, and that's where I was making etchings and lithographs and block prints and screen prints, and creating this really fun imagery. And so I was able to kind of discover a visual language, but film wasn't a part of that at all. And the goal then was to become a professor. I think, my goal was to teach at Denver University by the time I had to go to grad school after undergrad, but I kind of had a vision to do something practical. And
I was going to say, was it like a burning desire to teach, or was it like, well, you can't make a living doing art, but you can at least make a living teaching art? Like,
it was a compromise for sure. I found out I couldn't stand being a professor. I hated it. I love the students, but just having to grade and having to deal with the bureaucracy of a university, I ended up getting a job at DU. Taught there for a couple of years, and everyone was wonderful. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't my calling. It was a compromise of, I think it was a fear-based decision. But the Lord still worked through that, and He had bigger plans than I could have anticipated. He was dreaming bigger than I was.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Well, that's cool though. Okay. So I like though that, you're trying to be practical the whole time, and the whole time you're just sort of, but you've got this assumption that you can't do art like as a job. That can't just be your thing. That's not, and I think people tell us that all the time, but it does turn out that in fact, there are a lot of jobs out there. There are people who are designers. There are people who, are just artistic, and they do beautiful artistic things, and people buy them. So it is possible, right? But okay, so tell me a little bit more about the decision to go to school. You were in Pennsylvania, and you decided to go back to Colorado. Were you had just been like kind of missing the landscape there, or what was it?
I think the mountains had definitely a very strong pull on my heart. There's a wildness to Colorado. It's just the austerity of the views. I think there's some, like, your gaze goes upwards. Like in Pennsylvania, you're always hedged in by these trees and you can't really see out. But in Colorado, you can just see the clouds and the heavens. And I think there was certainly I think there's that. There was also, gosh, I don't know what I would hate to say it's just limited to just geography, but there is something here, and it was in my blood, and it just felt right. I think outside of the culture of my friends in Pennsylvania, I wasn't interested in Pennsylvania as a place to continue living. It was hot, like muggy and wet snow. It felt like there was more of a purity out west that I was after. It's just sunny, and I don't know.
Especially Eastern Pennsylvania, right? I mean, it's definitely humid in the summertime. You do not get that in Colorado. It's so dry. So, it's just a totally different, the temperature might look the same, right? Like, and it snows in both places and it's hot in both places. Totally different experience.
Yeah.
That's really true. That's really true.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, all right. So you go out, you're headed back to Colorado. Out of curiosity, though, you mentioned that after you became Orthodox, so you weren't Orthodox when you were in Pennsylvania, which is like the headquarters of Orthodoxy in America, right? Like, I think Pennsylvania has more Orthodox people per capita than any other state in the Union. And you managed to be out there for years and years and not become Orthodox, huh? What were
Yeah.
you? Where were you religiously? Were you raised in a particular denomination, or kind of footloose and fancy free? What were you doing?
I was raised in I would say, just non-denominational Christian practice that was borderline Pentecostal maybe at times. And it was Assemblies of God was, I think, one of the branches that my parents adhered to. But then we went to a Mennonite church that was more progressive Mennonite.
Yeah.
And then, I think I never, I don't like looking back. I never was really into it. There's a church we went to where it's like there's big banners and flags and like people dancing up front. And I never had friends in any of the churches. I never identified with kids my age. I always had my group of friends outside of the church, and I I think that was something that helped ground me in a sense, because I don't know, I loved God and I was drawn to know Him, but I don't know if I ever identified with how we like the expressions of worship that were offered to me.
Gotcha.
And it just, I don't know, it never felt, and I hate to say it, I guess maybe it wasn't like it just never sat with me very well. And I even went on to college, and I was 5 years at a evangelical church. And then that's when things started hitting the fan, and I was like, I'm out. And that's right when orthodoxy swooped in, right when these other things are happening. And so there was a transition there for sure.
I think it's so interesting because before I was Orthodox, this would not have occurred to me, right? Because I grew up non-denominational as well. And there were just like different expressions of Christianity. Did it strike you as even a thing that each of these different, like you're going from Assemblies of God to a progressive Mennonite church, right? Like that is a tremendous theological difference, right? But I feel like a lot of times Americans don't see it that way. Like we see it as like, well, this is charismatic, like it's a more maybe emotional, expressive way of being Christian, and this is a less expressive way. But it's not like we don't really sit down and realize like, oh, some of these people have different ideas of like what salvation is and who human beings are. And so when your parents were moving from one to the other, was it registering with your family that you were moving from one theology to another, or was it more like one group of Christians to another kind of group?
I think it was based on the discernment of, is the Holy Spirit present here? Do we like the sermon? Theology was never something that we talked about beyond like the Trinity. That was sort of the core focus. Like, oh, they're Trinitarian. Is the Spirit moving here? Let's go where the Spirit leads us. And theology wasn't something I even really got into until I started. It's wild that I could go my whole life without really diving into theology, without ever wondering where the Bible came from. And when I discovered the Bible was canonized 300 years after Christ, I'm like, well, then how can you start a church out of the Bible if the Bible was born out of a tradition? And what was that tradition? And if a tradition created and canonized the Bible, I want to be there. I want to understand like where that is. And so, there's a lot of questions that it was surprising I had never asked. And, and I think once I started delving into those, and it wasn't until I read Matthew Gallatin's book, Thirsting for God in a Land of Shallow Wells, which is a wild story because at our very evangelical church in Fort Collins, they had these evening services. And my wife, she's my wife now, but she wasn't then. I think we were friends or we were dating, but the pastor was prophesying over everyone. And he came up to my wife and he actually did this and tapped her forehead And this
for
was
those
like
of you on the radio, he's doing like we do when
sign
we
of
make
the
the sign of the
cross.
cross. He's got the top three fingers together and the two folded back. That's crazy. That's cool.
And he tapped her head and he says, all I see is John 6. John 6.
Oh, no. Oh, wow.
And my wife was like, okay, John 6. So she's studying
Right.
John chapter 6. If you
Right.
eat my flesh and drink my blood, my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. And he said, I see John 6. And that was all I had. And then he came up to me and he put his hand on my head and he closed his eyes and he says, I see long straws. I see long straws to drink from wells that are so deep. And I just sat there and I was like,
Whoa.
Okay, whatever. And then probably 2-3 weeks later, I found Matthew Gallatin's book, Thirsting for God in a Land of Shallow Wells. And so it was really cool that God used our very evangelical Protestant pastor as a vessel for us to find what we now know as the fullness of the faith. And I thought, I still like, as much as I was embittered by other things that took place, it was just cool to see the hand of God working through people, despite where those people were in life. You know, just like he was being faithful with what he had. He was like the background of that church was very questionable. The direction that it was going was very questionable, and God still used that. And it gives me hope for myself because I'm pretty questionable. And they're like, oh, he can still use me. Oh, thank God.
Thank God. Yeah, absolutely. That is really true. And especially, you know, a person of faith, no matter where they are, and, you know, who knows, right? Who knows how he got there and where he'll end up, and who knows.
Yeah.
But thank God. That's cool.
I'm grateful for that.
But so out of curiosity, so he says like this thing about straws and deep wells, which is interesting. But, and also I want to say John 6, like, I think it is really fascinating because just recently I have a friend who's thinking about orthodoxy and really struggled with the idea of the body and blood being truly Christ. And I was like, look at John 6, right? And the whole thing about John 6 is not only does he say that, but people leave because it's objectionable and he lets them go. Yeah. And it's like, you know what? If it were symbolic, he would have stopped and he would have said, listen. Yeah, it's really just bread and wine. It's cool. Don't worry about it. And you just want to say, like, to all these people today, where it's just like, guys, he said it was okay. Like, he just let them go. You know, it is fascinating. But okay.
Well, the wild thing is when Debbie, my wife, then, she meets Father Evan, because we keep hearing about this orthodoxy thing. She's like, I'm going to go talk to this guy. So she goes and meets Father Evan, and they talk for like an hour or two, and they're just going in circles. And he's like, Deborah, sweet Deborah, have you ever read John 6? And she's like, it's about John 6. And she's like, what? And so anyhow, that was the connection. And so anyhow, it was a little breadcrumb trail that we had been following, and it was fulfilled. It was like, oh, this makes sense now.
That is really neat. And I do think a lot of times that's how God speaks to us. It's not a thundering voice. Yeah, this is my beloved son. It tends to be more, you keep hearing the same phrase from different people in different contexts. And you're like, what is that? I need to investigate that. But so he says John 6, he says long straws and deep wells. But how do you get to Matthew Gallatin's book? Like, had you already heard a little bit about orthodoxy by then, or what? How did that work? Because I feel like that's a book that is not on every coffee table.
Yeah,
I love that book. It should be.
I love it.
It's
also pretty brutal. It's kind of a brutal book to read if you're really happy with where you're at. But if you're, I think, a little disenchanted with things that have taken place within Protestantism, that book is like salve to wounds. But no, I had a roommate who was friends with another man who they had a child with disabilities, and they were at one point in their church were told that they had done something sinful, and that was probably why their son had been born with a disability. And I think our friend, he just found himself like raising a fist, if not in reality, in his heart. And it was just like, this is so far from truth. And so he started researching orthodoxy, and then my best friend started looking. They were in conversation, and then then we entered into the dialogue, and they were trying to convince me I was a Protestant. I'm like, I'm not a Protestant. I'm not protesting anything. I just love God. That doesn't make me a Protestant. And they're like, Evan, you were a Protestant. You're in a Protestant tradition. And I had no idea even what any of that meant. I was so naive and had never studied church history, had never questioned, the history of the church I was going to and where it came from. And once things kind of hit the fan there, it was like, okay, if we're displaced and we have to pull our activity out of this church, now we have to go find a place to plug our faith into. And then it was like you're faced with options, and you're at this buffet, and you have to like pick, well, what is my flavor? What do I crave? And it suddenly made me the chooser of truth. And it was just like, whatever I want, I can go find that flavor. And I think Orthodoxy was definitely not what I was looking for. My first experience in Orthodox Church was visiting with my friend. And I had already displaced myself from the church we had been at for 5 years. And that was because they were praying in tongues over me, and they were trying to push me over and I guess slay me in the spirit. And I was resisting. All these hands came on me, and they're pushing me. And they're trying to push me over. And I was like, I don't want them to push me over. If the Holy Spirit's going to push me over, he's going to knock me down. And because I was resisting, suddenly there's a demon on me. And that threw me in a downward spiral. I left crying in the back seat, just huddled in a ball. While my Debbie, she dropped me off at my house, and I was like, I'm done. That was not of the kingdom of heaven. That was hell. And so then I visited this Orthodox church, St. Spiridon, and it was so weird. I'm like, this is just weird. And it wasn't the flavor I was looking for. I had no palate. I had no way of even tasting what it was. But I trusted my friend, and I think time went on, and we just started entering into that dialogue and asking the questions that we had never asked. And so that was right after we graduated. My wife and we got married shortly thereafter. And then we were kind of in limbo of like, do we become Orthodox? Do we have an Orthodox wedding? And we were on a track to get married faster than we were to become Orthodox. So we got married in a wheat field outside the church, and it was lovely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, and I love also knowing that I'm not the only person, because, so often you talk to people and they're just like, I didn't know what I wanted. And I walked in and I was like, this must be the kingdom of God. I'm in heaven. And I walked into the Orthodox liturgy and was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? What's going on? I mean, at least yours was in English, so at least you knew, like, what
it was in English, yes.
I didn't even know what they were praying, and I was just like, and I was sort of, but I'd pray, I'd be like, God, is this bad? And it's like, no, it doesn't seem like it's bad. Is it good? Like, maybe it's good. Okay, but it was really, it's, I like how you say that I didn't have a palate for it. Like, if you don't have any sense of what it is, it can be really hard to walk into a formal liturgy and make sense of it, and let alone judge whether it's holy or not, or good or not. It can be very difficult. But
especially when you are the judge. You are the judge of what is true and what isn't. And I got to a point where I couldn't trust. I'm like, how do I even trust myself? How do I trust that I know what truth is?
Right? Why would I trust myself?
And I got
frankly,
to the point,
I'm wrong about everything all the time. What are we doing here?
and it's a lot of weight. It's a lot of weight. And like, there's this idea of like discerning truth, but then, like, where do I place my faith? That it needs a home. Like, I need to be active somewhere. And that was really hard. And at some point, there's a lot of things in the church I didn't trust, like the saints, having relationships and, interacting with saints, and some of the perspectives of the Theotokos, these things. Even when I became Orthodox, I didn't believe them, but at that point I said, you know what, I trust the church, and I have to slay my will and slay my opinions. And there's so much freedom in that, not having to. And the beauty is, I remember every time my parents would step into a new church, we would like be on high alert. Like, are they preaching truth? Is it, you'd have to like discern fully. Mm-hmm. And it was a very kind of fear-based process. And now you can visit any Orthodox church and you're at home, and you don't have to be like on this hyper vigilant quest to discern if like truth is being spoken. You're just there to experience
Right.
and participate in the presence of God. And that's like a really freeing thing.
You can actually just show up to learn. Like you can just trust and not struggle through it and not have that weight. Yeah, I know. It is interesting to me too, though, because it takes a long time to break that habit. And I know when I was first Orthodox, I'd go to different churches and I'd be like, oh, they do this wrong or they do that wrong. And then over the years, you find out like, no, there are just different ways of doing it. And it like at different times in your life, different messages are more helpful or less helpful. And like you just sort of learn like it's just out of my hands and it's just good that way. It's better. I do love that. All right. Well, so we are going to take a short break. And when we come back with Evan, we are going to hear some more about how over the years this becomes a situation where he's making films and eventually working on Facing Phantoms, which is an Orthodox documentary, which I think a lot of you are going to find really cool. So without any further ado, let's take a little short break. We'll be right back with Evan. And remember, you can call in at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346. See you in a minute.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Vestibule of Heaven, a new story by Catherine Bulger Hyde. When professional house restorer Kelly Mason inherits a historic bungalow from an unknown benefactor, she plans to fix up the house and donate it to the community. But when she visits the place, she feels an unexpected emotional pull and decides to move in. As she works to restore the house, Kelly senses a ghostly presence guiding her to some startling discoveries about her own past. Her co-workers, the McCarthys, and especially their enigmatically appealing friend Nathaniel, encourage her to unlock her history and find the home and family she's never known. But to do so, Kelly must open her rational mind to the unexplainable and her bricked-up heart to forgiveness and love. Coming mid-March from Ancient Faith. For more information, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich-Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm here tonight with Evan Mann. We've been talking about St. Spiridon's a bit, actually, because Evan goes to Father Evan's parish in Loveland, Colorado. And so we've been talking about how he and his wife, Deborah, discovered Orthodoxy and sort of how they handled it coming in. Evan, you were just saying that you got married in a cornfield or wheat field outside the church. So it was just, you weren't really ready to finish the catechumenate, but it was really time to get married. So you just went for it. I love that. I love that you were like church adjacent, literally. That's beautiful.
It wasn't next to the church. It was just not under the roof of the church. So yeah, gotcha. Debbie's parents have some land, and we got married in the backyard. So, yeah.
Okay, there you go. So it was more like not literal. It was a figurative term.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So
outside the umbrella of the church is what I was probably trying to say.
Yes. So you had mentioned that you were an art professor for a short time, or teaching art in Denver. What did you do when you realized that wasn't your calling? Where'd you go next?
So in grad school, so after I graduated, we got married, we became Orthodox. 2 weeks later, we left the East Coast to Providence, Rhode Island. And I was getting my master's degree in printmaking at Rhode Island School of Design.
Oh, nice.
And while at RISD, I started taking these film classes in the digital media department, and I started making films. And I learned all these programs like Adobe Premiere and After Effects and Photoshop and how they all work together. And I learned how to use a camera at a bit higher level. And so then we come back to Colorado, and I get a professor job, and we also simultaneously started our little production company, because it's like, hey, I have this skill set. We might as well see if we can make it marketable. And then I was also delivering artwork across the country to like Art Basel in Miami. So I was working for an art gallery, basically delivering artwork to art fairs and driving a van across country. And I was working at a painting and wine bar, teaching painting to middle-aged drunk women who were, that was interesting.
Yes.
And so
I've never done that, but I know whole groups of women, and it'll be like 10 rowdy women. Sometimes it's very calm, lovely people, right? But sometimes it can be kind of a rowdy crowd getting together and all drawing, like painting a parrot or whatever.
But more often it got rowdy, and
did it?
It was fun. It was fun, but it wasn't a career, and I knew that. But yeah, one by one, I would say that it was the video production company that just kept growing, and I was able to stop delivering, like driving across country, delivering artwork. That was hard. And then the painting and wine bar, they ended up closing down. And so I think that cleared itself out. And then it was just teaching at DU in the art department and running our production company. And we had a pretty big job we were working on. And I told them I wasn't available on a certain day because I was teaching. And the client got upset. She's like, we hired you as a professional filmmaker to handle this, and you're not available to edit all day on this day. And I went home and I was like, I told Debbie, I'm like, hey, we need to quit. Like, it's time to quit teaching. And I didn't like teaching. So it was kind of a good, like, you're supposed to be a teacher. Everyone's supposed to, like, it's this passing on of knowledge. Like, there's a dignified beauty in teaching, and it's one of those things that I felt I should do. And but if I was really honest with myself, it wasn't something that I truly enjoyed. And so it was pretty easy to quit that and put 100% of our focus into the production company. And that was scary because you don't know how if it's gonna work. Having nothing consistent, but the Lord was faithful through that. And that first year, I think we made $15,000, and I was like, woo. We didn't have kids at the time. Yeah, that's a profit.
A lot of small businesses don't turn a profit that first year, right? I mean, it's tough. Yeah. It's really tough.
But then the next year it doubled, and then like it just So it was like, okay, this is it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So I'm imagining that some of the people in the audience may be thinking like, well, what does a professional filmmaker do? Like, we think of filmmaking, a lot of times we just think of feature length, okay, a big movie. Like, what else would one do if they worked professionally in film?
So the first job I did was filming weddings. And I was a wedding videographer, and I was very good at it. I enjoyed it. And it was sort of interesting because a wedding is the same thing happening over and over again, but the characters are different, the places are different. And it was like, okay, how do I find a way to film every wedding differently? And I would go into it with rules like, hey, I'm just going to use a 50 millimeter lens and just be handheld out on everything. And the next one was, I'm going to use a wide angle and everything's going to be on a tripod. And so I got to practice these kind of filmmaking techniques. And then I started making commercials, like little ones. And then like companies like Cliff Bar would reach out to me and say, hey, we're looking for someone in Denver. We have to make our Olympic anthem video. And so we made that. And then you get to put that on your website. And then Ralph Lauren reaches out to you and they're like, hey, we need to film Gus Kenworthy, professional free skier, wearing the clothing or the jacket that will be at the Olympics. And so we got that bid. And then you kind of start to work up a little bit. And then I don't have to film weddings anymore, which is really nice because I was over that pretty quickly.
But that makes sense, though, that it's not necessarily like Ralph Lauren has to have their one guy who does all their film. It's like, oh, well, this is in Denver, so we'll get a Denver guy, and then there's going to be something in Seattle. We'll get a Seattle guy for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of do freelance for different people. But I would imagine on the website and on the portfolio, the more of those big names you have, the more of those big names you attract.
And you're constantly curating your work, so you always want to put your best work on the top, and you can start deleting your old projects so that, by the time you have your proudest work to show, and that's just slow growth. It's a joy. And I was always told by a lot of people, like, you can't be an artist. And I even remember overhearing this conversation. I was probably 15, that my grandmother and my uncle were having at a cabin in the mountains that they had, and I was sleeping up on the loft. And I heard this conversation about how my grandmother couldn't believe that my mom was encouraging me to go to art school. And it was like, he needs to get into real estate. He needs to, do all these things. I remember hearing that, and it put this fire underneath me that I was like, I'm going to do this. And it was sort of a rebellious fire. Like, I'm going to figure this out. And then after, it was really humbling. I had to eat my humble soup, because after getting out of undergrad, I ended up working at a place where I was a direct care provider for people with mental and developmental disabilities. And it was the hardest job, because I was doing overnights in a house with these 3 guys, and you're doing very challenging things, and dealing with very challenging behaviors. And it was like, Lord, this is not what I want to be doing, but here I am making $8 an hour, spending the night at this house with these 3 guys, and one of them weighs 400 pounds, and I wake up in the middle of the night and he's like tickling my feet. And just like this wild, like, I had a tank from a toilet lid thrown at me. And then I had an entire Christmas tree full of glass balls thrown at me, and just like wild stories. And I can't tell you all of them, but it was just like, I'm here, now what? And then that's when I'm like, I need to go to grad school. So that's when I got into grad school. And but all the while,
Grandma's right. It's hard to get a good job with just the art degree, the bachelor's degree.
Yes. But I pressed into it. I pushed further, and I'm like, let's just go to grad school now. I'll go to a good school, and then I'll be a professor. And then that led to starting our production company and growing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So where did the idea for it's Chasing Phantoms, right? I'm not making that up. Did I just come up with this wrong?
Facing Phantoms. You got
Facing Phantoms. Thank you. I'm saying it wrong, but I can't. It rhymes, so I can't recognize that it's wrong. When did that start? Like, how long have you been thinking about that, and how did it start taking shape for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started our production company in 2012. So it's been 12 years that we've been faithfully just cranking that out. And it was always on my heart to somehow turn the camera towards something personal that was connected to the faith experience. But I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know what that would be. And I don't even remember exactly how it came about, but I think I saw the film Becoming Truly Human, and a friend sent that to me, and he said, this is really meaningful to me. And I watched it, and we talked about it, and I just felt like, you know what, this is something that I can pursue. And I felt a calling, if you will, to start stepping into that. And so we did. We financed, a trailer or a teaser, if you will, to kind of play with a look and feel and use that for fundraising, and just started. I just like to start something. So that's how it started. And we probably started that idea was probably 2 years ago. And then I acted on it maybe a year later when the timing was right, with our lives. And then, I took about 6 months to get that teaser going and build a website, and just start the conversation. And to be honest, making a 30-second commercial is very different than making a feature-length documentary. And, 30-second commercial we made like Benjamin Moore's 2023 campaign, and we had a big budget for that. And it was all miniature scale models with CGI characters talking, and it was very fun. But you get in, get out, and you're done in 4 weeks. Well, documentary work is hard. You're long days, you don't eat, you're traveling, and it's just a whole other animal. And there isn't a budget. There's not a big company behind you saying, yeah, here's $150,000, go make this happen. And I'm a very scrappy filmmaker by nature, and trying to do more with less. And so just trying to figure that out on my own is that this whole new way of working has been really exciting and very sobering at the same time.
That makes sense. That sounds about right. I mean, I got to see, is it the teaser that I saw that you sent me?
Mm-hmm.
It's so beautiful. And I can tell, I mean, I was struck right away that you're a visual artist. Like, you can feel that you're someone who does, I'm not that film isn't visual art, it is, but there's something very clearly like that you are an artist, that you've been doing, whatever it is, whatever you've been doing, lino cuts or whatever, it's very clear, and it's really beautiful. It's really neat how the visual images sort of interact with the narration. And it's, of course, the teaser is an interview with Father Evan Armitage. Tell us a little bit about it. What is he talking about, and what images do you put up when he's talking, and why? And just talk to me about the teaser.
It's funny. I haven't watched the teaser in a while. I don't even remember what's in there. I think we're talking about distraction and maybe suffering. I got to go out to interview Father John Valadez in Lompoc, California, who does the Death to the World ministry and the Eknekron podcast on Spotify. And then Father Evan is my spiritual father, and he's close. he's right down the street. And so, to get some things on camera with him, and just trying to find as many voices and textures as I can. But yeah, the documentary is, in this case, Father Evan's confronting distraction and how most of us spend our lives outside of the present. And I think he's specifically kind of poking fun at phones or screens in general. But I think the ethos of the documentary is to create something that's beautiful, that's aimed at ultimately non-Orthodox. I don't want to create something that is, preaching to the choir. I picture it as a Trojan horse that finds its way into the living rooms of homes, and rather than slaying the occupants of the home, it brings life and it brings life to them in the context of their own home. And I think that the beauty of Orthodoxy, the experience of it, there's not only visual beauty, like when you visit old monasteries and you see what is inside of these buildings, it's unbelievable what architecture and the metallurgy that's taking place, and the paintings, the icons, the woodwork, these lost arts to a Westerner who's maybe used to experiencing church inside of a steel structure, like a steel building, and where it's just the beauty isn't the first thing that's maybe considered, and that you're in a space that's void of artwork. I think that's the thing that Orthodoxy really draws people in with, is beauty and the expression of beauty. And so I want to create a film that is an icon of the church, and I want to, like your podcast is Everyday Orthodox. I want to find voices of everyday Orthodox that can speak to the beauty of tradition and ritual. And I think America is really hot on ritual right now. People are like, oh, my morning ritual is granola with, a fried egg and a smoothie. And then I go do yoga on the patio, and it's a great ritual. And I think people have a hunger for ritual and for routine. And really that's, they desire liturgy, the meaning in everyday, like liturgizing. And so I want a film that shows people being transformed through the Orthodox faith. And I think that's my heart. That's what I want to do. So, and it's not for Orthodox. Of course, Orthodox will probably share it with non-Orthodox, but something that shared, because it's a nihilistic world out there right now. There's a lot of people without hope, without purpose, without meaning, and post-COVID things got really dark for a lot of people, and they don't leave their homes. How are they ever going to find Netflix? I think Netflix and Hulu are such a ministry opportunity to share hope and meaning to people. So I don't know if we'll be on Netflix, but that would be fun.
Wouldn't it be great though? But no, I mean, I think it's interesting too, because as you say, you want to be an icon of the church, but it can't just be images of churches, right? Because like you and I experienced when we first came in, we didn't understand that. We didn't have a way of processing it. So you have to kind of translate this beauty, and you have to translate all of this meaning, and you have to have images that arrest people who aren't trained to be arrested by just the interior of the Orthodox Church. So you're using, I think, a lot of other kinds of images and a lot of beautiful, one of the main things that I remember, I haven't even watched this in a long time, Evan, and the big thing that I remember is that you have these circular images where you'll have like a halo is the top half, and then the bottom half is the globe, and then now it's different things sort of that make up the semicircles of the circle. I'm probably not explaining that in a way that sounds beautiful, but take my word for it, it is beautiful. It's really neat though, but you have very arresting, fascinating, and beautiful images, and they draw you in, and you had like this close-up of the bee and honey and all these different, and we're sort of listening to this conversation about distraction and prayer, or just even distraction like in our presence, right? And I think that is a big question in American culture, right? Mindfulness. How do you be present in the moment instead of constantly distracted by your phone or by whatever else seems so important at the time but isn't? Anyway, I think it's very important to have some art that speaks to people who aren't already Orthodox in a visual language, in a language that they can understand. And I think that's what this looks like to me, but I would also say, I think Orthodox people will still enjoy it, because I really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I was mesmerized. I was super excited about the various images you were showing and sort of just the meaning of all of it. And it was also beautiful the way that it all came together. And so, beautiful artwork, I think, is interesting to everybody. But especially, how lovely to have something that's aimed at people who are not yet in the church and who do not yet know what we're talking about. So I think it's wonderful. Is it intentional, that sense of like, it can't just be icons? Like, you can't just celebrate the images that we love so much, right? Like the candles and the icons and, there's another priest and here's a procession. And to us, that speaks to us, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the average Netflix guy who hasn't been out of his house in a while, right?
Yeah. And I think there's this idea of making something accessible. All of creation is pointing towards our Creator. And I think that everything has that fingerprint of the divine. And so all material, and if you read like St. John of Damascus, and he's talking about, he's arguing for the use of icons as a form, like to be used in worship. He's saying that all material, all matter, God's, because of the incarnation, all things are good. And, they were good when they were created, and then Christ comes and enters into humanity, and in all things he's spitting in the mud. Like today, our gospel reading, he spits in the mud, and he rubs material into the eyes of the blind human, and they see. And so this mud, just mud, is participating with God and with man, and so I think that's very important. And material is important in all things. Like, you don't have to just point the camera at something inside the church. All things are good and useful.
Absolutely.
And I think sound design too is a huge component, because you talked about visual art. I hired a professional sound designer, and just to mix the audio. And I think whenever you're watching something, audio is, you don't know it, but audio, I think, is more than half of the experience, because audio is telling you how to see. And so sound design and having a custom music score that isn't just Byzantine chanting the whole time. I actually am hiring all non-Orthodox people to help me because I want them to see with fresh eyes. Like my cinematographer, Freddie, I picked him to help me because I didn't want someone who had preconceived notions of, oh yeah, this is Orthodox, we've got to show this, this, and this. I wanted someone with a camera to see everything with fresh eyes because he is, at the end of the day, like, I want someone with fresh eyes who doesn't know anything about Orthodoxy to see it. And I think that working with people who don't necessarily have a faith is an important part of the process, because then Freddie sees things and he's asking questions, and I'm like, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. And like we'll have a whole interview, and we're like, I didn't understand anything that guy just said. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work then, because if that was, and so it's good to bring me down a little bit out of my lofty thinking and just be real practical.
Yeah.
And so that's been an important aspect for me as well, is just having collaborators who can see the faith with new eyes and to hear what they have to say, because I really care about what they have to say. And it's almost more important than what, an Orthodox person might have to say. Because I'm making something, it's a gift for my non-Orthodox friends, ultimately.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. We have a question for you on YouTube. John says, have you met or worked with other Orthodox filmmakers, such as Silas Carbo and Simon? I actually don't know how to say Simon's last name. Sionka, yeah, from Sacred Alaska. Have you met them? Have you met other Orthodox? Is there kind of a community of Orthodox filmmakers that you can tap into?
Yes, and I'm learning to do that. I met Simon a long time ago. He goes to the it's Holy Theophany in Colorado Springs, and yeah, I met him a long time ago, and then we've recently reconnected. And then Tom Maeda is working with Dr. Tim Patitsis. Yeah, give me Dr. Tim. And they just created a film, and so I have been in dialogue with them, and they're making beautiful work, and it's helpful to have other Orthodox people that you're talking to. And I have another friend in Louisiana who I talk to often, and he's so to have other Orthodox creators it is important that you're in dialogue with, because I think you can feel very isolated and like you're on an island making something. And I do think that film can be a beautiful form of iconography. It's not one that's necessarily canonized, but it's I think there is a place, and it's not that it maybe aids in worship, but it can be an icon of the church in various aspects, and in a way that participates in time and space differently than an icon hanging on a wall. And you and I are icons of Christ.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. I mean, we're icons of Christ.
Yeah.
So, I don't know that I'm aiding anyone in their worship. I may be distracting them, in fact, by, tapping my toes too much or something. But they're all, everything's an icon of Christ in the end, right? Everything beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank God. Thank God. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I'm glad that I know when you and I first talked, I was like, oh, let me rack my brain and tell you all the names because it is a beautiful thing to talk to other people who are in kind of a same space. And of course, some of them are maybe working for an Orthodox market, and then others are doing the same thing you're doing and trying to find a way to sort of sneak into other areas, into other audiences. But either way, there is this sort of philosophy, and it's also helpful, I think, for figuring out how to fund a project. Because how are you going to fund this project? What are you going to do? How can you do it? Tell me about it. What does that process look like?
Pray for me.
Will do. And audience, please.
I think I came into it. So I put together a budget initially, and I come from a commercial background where we can easily in one day spend $100,000 on production. That's renting a space, hiring 20 people, having models fabricated, miniature scale models, and props, and camera rentals, and it's a big thing. And so when I approached this, I was like, okay, what what do I need to make this at the highest level, make the best documentary that I can make? And that number came to 800,000, which is almost $1 million. And to make a feature film, $1 million isn't that much.
Right.
But then I had to be like, okay, what if $800,000 doesn't fall from the sky? How do I still make this? And it's potential, if our production company is doing well with commercial work, we could just continue funding it out of our pocket. And that's what we have been doing. But that's not sustainable. And I'm not a fundraiser. I'm not gifted in that sense. And so, I think the door was sort of closed a bit on my production of this. And I'm at a point where it's like, Lord, if you want this to happen, I'm willing, I'm here, I'm showing up. I can't do everything. I can't run my production company and try and do this as a side hustle because I'm a one-man band and we don't have the means to hire someone full-time to like do all the other things. And so I'm just currently fitting this in the little cracks of life that I can, without spending money or too much money. And so I'm in a lull right now trying to find, I think I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, that's the truth is I'm holding my hands up in the air, and there's that whole saying, if it is to be, it's up to me. And, I'm doing everything I can to keep making this. But I don't want to make it alone. And I'm trying to find, what would be wonderful is to have an executive producer come in and say, hey, I believe in your project. I'm willing to finance it. And, here's that money. And the bottom tier, I think, would be if I could have full focus on this. I think we could do this for as little as 200,000, and it could be my main focus, and it'd just be a very, very small, lean operation. But I still have to pay people to color grade the footage, to do sound design, to create the score and the music, and to do an audio mix. I have to buy airline tickets to go fly here and there, and hotel rooms, and I own all the gear. I have my camera sitting here. This is my setup.
I love that.
And so it's really just time and talent and
so here's the question though: how can people find you if they're interested in helping or being a part of it, or if they know someone who is?
Yeah, so there's a website, facingphantoms.com.
Okay.
And that kind of, I think, says if you go there, you can find everything else that you need. And the title of the film, I didn't want it to be this overtly like super Christian film that would turn people off. I wanted it to be intriguing and kind of dark. And it's this idea that we are becoming less human as we continue to pursue the phantom of technology. And this idea of like when we're looking at our screen, we are facing a phantom. This isn't real. And yet we spend most of our lives sitting here like this. And I think also when you turn the phone off, you see your reflection in the glass. And if you're becoming less human by living a less human way of life, you're becoming a phantom of what God intended us to be, a ghost, a shadow. Even C.S. Lewis talks about that in The Great Divorce, where the people become phantoms.
That's true.
And
it's true.
And so anyhow, that's the title. It's a
beautiful image. It's awesome. It's Facing Phantoms, and you can find it online, facingphantoms.com. Also on the Everyday Orthodox Facebook page, I just posted a link. Also, if you're on Instagram, he has an account, facing_phantoms. If you go to that account, you can look through like the posts that he's put up. They're so beautiful. Like they're just, little clips, little images. They're really beautiful. And of course, on the website, you can see more. But please check it out. Even just check it out just to see it because it's really neat. But also, if you've got $200,000 burning a hole in your pocket, definitely check it out for sure. Evan, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy.
It was great. Thank you. And thank you to our audience. We'll see you next week for another Everyday Orthodox Christian. We'll see you then. Good night.